When I was 13, my family moved to a farmhouse in rural Indiana. My father, ever the optimist, had convinced my mother that swapping city life for acres of farmland was the key to family bonding. The centerpiece of our new property was a massive cornfield that stretched beyond the horizon, the stalks swaying hypnotically in the wind. At first, it was enchanting, a golden sea under the sun, alive and almost breathing. But when twilight fell, the cornfield transformed. Shadows seemed to slither between the rows, and the rustling took on a sinister cadence, like whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. "Don't go into the cornfield at night," our neighbor, old Mr. Halpern, had warned us. "The stalks don't take kindly to wanderers." We laughed it off, of course. Mr. Halpern was ancient and smelled of pipe smoke and regret. His warning felt like the ramblings of someone with too much time and not enough company. But I never liked how he said it, with a mix of fear and certainty. One humid evening in late July, the kind where the air clings to your skin, my older brother, Matt, had the brilliant idea to play hide and seek in the cornfield. It was just him, me, and our cousin Amber, who was staying with us for the summer. "Come on, it'll be fun," Matt insisted, grabbing a flashlight and a mischievous grin. I hesitated, remembering Mr. Halpern's words, but Amber was already halfway down the dirt path toward the field. I couldn't back out without looking like a coward. We set the rules: no going beyond the old scarecrow at the center of the field, and no flashlights for the hiders. Matt counted down, his voice echoing into the twilight, while Amber and I slipped into the maze of stalks. The cornfield was suffocatingly quiet. The only sounds were the crunch of my sneakers on the dry soil and the occasional rustle of corn leaves brushing against my arms. I found a spot near the scarecrow and crouched low, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I heard the whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a single voice, but a chorus, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. My stomach churned. "Ember," I whispered, hoping she was nearby. The whispering stopped. Then, from somewhere deeper in the field, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night. I shot up and ran toward the sound, the stalks clawing at my skin. "Ember? Matt?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Matt's flashlight beam cut through the darkness as he stumbled toward me, his face pale. "Where's Ember?" he gasped. "I thought she was with you." We called her name over and over, our voices swallowed by the oppressive silence. The scarecrow loomed nearby, its tattered clothes flapping in the breeze. For a moment, I could have sworn its head turned to follow us. We searched until the flashlight died, then stumbled back to the house, our hearts pounding. My parents called the sheriff, and a search party combed the cornfield until dawn. They found nothing. No footprints, no torn fabric. It was as if Amber had vanished into thin air. Weeks passed, and the cornfield grew taller, denser. My parents didn't let us near it, not that I wanted to go back. But the whispers started again, soft at first, just outside my bedroom window at night. "You're hearing things," Matt said, though his eyes darted nervously toward the field. One night, under the eerie light of a harvest moon, I woke to the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. Peeking out my window, I saw Amber standing at the edge of the cornfield, her back to me. I bolted downstairs, shouting her name, but by the time I reached the door, she was gone. Only the stalks swayed, bathed in silver light. "She's in there," I whispered to Matt later. "I saw her. You're crazy," he muttered, but I could see the doubt creeping in. That night, we decided to go back. Armed with flashlights and a kitchen knife, Matt's idea, we stepped into the cornfield. The air felt heavier, the whispers louder, forming words we couldn't quite understand. As we approached the scarecrow, the flashlight flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I felt something brush past me cold, like an icy hand. "Matt," I whispered, but he didn't answer. The scarecrow loomed ahead, its head tilted as if watching us. Its eyes, once buttons, gleamed with a malevolent light. Then I saw her, Amber, standing just beyond the scarecrow, her face pale and blank, her eyes unfocused. "Amber," I cried, rushing toward her. But as I reached out, her mouth twisted into an unnatural grin. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered, her voice overlapping with a dozen others. The scarecrow's arms moved, the fabric tearing as something dark and sinewy emerged. Matt screamed, and I turned to see the cornfield closing in around us, the stalks twisting like living things. They found me at dawn, curled up at the edge of the field, muttering incoherently. Matt and Amber were never found. The authorities ruled it a tragic accident, a case of two kids lost in the cornfield. But I know the truth. The whispers still haunt me, even years later. Sometimes when I'm alone, I hear Amber's voice, calling me back to the field. And I know one day I'll answer. In the quiet farming town of Pine Hollow, the annual Harvest Festival was the biggest event of the year. For generations, families would gather to celebrate the end of the season, feasting on pumpkin pie and cider beneath a canopy of fairy lights strung across the town square. But no one talked about the cornfield. It loomed just beyond the festival grounds, acres of twisting stalks that whispered in the wind like a sinister secret. The townsfolk told stories of people who wandered in and never came out. Some said it was cursed. Others swore it was haunted by the souls of those who disrespected the land. When I moved to Pine Hollow with my dad, the festival sounded charming, quaint, even. I didn't grow up around superstition, so the warnings felt like silly small-town folklore. That changed the night of the festival. I wasn't even supposed to be in the corn maze. I had planned to spend the evening hanging out by the food trucks, avoiding awkward small talk with locals. But when Olivia, the mayor's daughter, grabbed my hand and said, "Let's do the maze." It's tradition. I couldn't say no. Olivia led the way with a flashlight, her laughter echoing through the narrow dirt paths. The maze was poorly marked, with stalks towering over us and blocking out the moonlight. "Why does everyone act so weird about the cornfield?" I asked, trying to keep up with her. She hesitated, her flashlight beam wavering. "It's just a story parents tell to keep kids from getting lost. You know how small towns are," but her voice wavered, and I caught her glancing over her shoulder more than once. About halfway through, we noticed the others had disappeared. There were supposed to be groups of people scattered throughout the maze, but the laughter and chatter had faded into an eerie silence. "Maybe we get turned around," Olivia said, biting her lip. She pulled out her phone, but there was no signal. "Let's just head back," I suggested, my unease growing. But when we tried to retrace our steps, the paths didn't make sense. They twisted in impossible ways, leading us back to the same spot, a clearing with a crude wooden altar in the center. The altar was unsettling. It was made of old, splintered boards and stained with something dark. Around its base were dried cornstalks and withered flowers arranged in a crude circle. "Okay, this is officially creepy," Olivia muttered, clutching my arm. That's when we saw the scarecrow. It was perched on a tall wooden pole at the edge of the clearing, its head a burlap sack stuffed with straw. The body was dressed in ragged flannel and overalls, but its hands, those weren't made of straw. They were bone. "What kind of sick joke is this?" I whispered, my throat dry. Olivia didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the scarecrow's face, or where its face should have been. The burlap sack had 2 crude holes for eyes and a jagged tear for a mouth. And it was smiling. "Nope, we're done. We're leaving," Olivia said, yanking me toward one of the paths. But the corn had grown denser, the stalks bending inward to block the way. Every direction we turned, the paths closed behind us. Then we heard a low guttural sound, like a growl mixed with the rustling of dry leaves. "We have to go back to the clearing," Olivia whispered. When we returned to the altar, the scarecrow was gone. Where did it go? I stammered, my pulse pounding in my ears. Olivia didn't respond. She was staring at the altar, where a small, leather-bound book had appeared. Its cover was cracked and brittle, the pages yellowed with age. She opened it, her hands trembling. "It's a journal," she said, her voice barely audible. "It talks about sacrifices." Before I could ask what she meant, the growling returned, louder now, surrounding us. Shadows moved between the stalks' figures with elongated limbs and faces hidden beneath burlap sacks. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like puppets on tangled strings. "Run!" Olivia screamed, but there was nowhere to go. The figures stepped into the clearing, their heads tilting in unison as they closed in. One of them held a sickle, its blade glinting in the dim light. "Please," I shouted. We didn't mean to, but my words were drowned out by a deafening roar as the cornfield came alive. The stalks twisted and writhed, their leaves slashing like knives. I don't remember how I got out. One moment, I was cornered in the clearing, the scarecrow figures reaching for me, and the next, I was stumbling onto the festival grounds, covered in scratches and dirt. Olivia wasn't with me. The townsfolk froze when they saw me, their faces a mix of fear and resignation. The mayor approached, his expression grim. "She went into the cornfield, didn't she?" he asked. I nodded, too shaken to speak. "You should have listened," he said quietly. I left Pine Hollow the next morning. My dad didn't argue when I begged him to pack up and go, though I never told him what happened. A week later, I read about the festival in the news. The article mentioned a tragic accident, a fire that swept through the corn maze, killing Olivia and several others. The official story was an electrical fault. But I know better. Sometimes when I'm alone, I hear the rustling of corn, even though I live miles away from any fields. And at night, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear a growl. I was driving back from Chicago to my hometown in Nebraska, cutting through miles of open farmland under a sky thick with storm clouds. The trip was supposed to be straightforward, but a road closure forced me onto a detour, a narrow, unmarked dirt road flanked by endless rows of corn. My GPS was useless, showing nothing but a blank screen with a spinning wheel. The radio crackled with static, and my phone had no signal. I told myself it was just a minor inconvenience, but as the road stretched on, the unease settled in my chest like a weight. I must have driven for nearly an hour when the engine sputtered and died. Cursing under my breath, I tried restarting the car, but it refused to turn over. The cornfield loomed on either side, the stalks unnaturally still despite the brewing storm. There were no houses, no signs of life, just the oppressive silence of the fields. Grabbing a flashlight from the glove compartment, I stepped out into the cool, damp air. I figured I could walk until I found a farmhouse or someone who could help. But the moment I stepped onto the dirt road, I heard it. A faint rustling, not from the wind, but from within the cornfield itself. I told myself it was probably an animal, a deer or a raccoon. But the sound wasn't random. It followed me, keeping pace as I walked. "Hello," I called out, shining my flashlight toward the stalks. The beam illuminated nothing but endless rows of corn, the light swallowed by the darkness beyond. I kept walking, trying to ignore the growing sensation that I was being watched. That's when I saw the figure. It was just a shadow at first, barely visible through the dense stalks. But as I moved closer, I saw it more clearly, a tall, lanky shape, its head slightly tilted. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching me. "Hey," I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. I could use some help. My car broke down, no response. I stepped closer to the edge of the field, but the figure vanished, as if it had never been there. Something about the way it disappeared too fast, too seamless, made my skin crawl. I decided to keep walking, refusing to let my imagination get the better of me. But after what felt like an eternity, I realized something was wrong. The road didn't end. No matter how far I went, the scenery didn't change. The same rows of corn, the same packed dirt under my feet. I turned around, thinking maybe I'd somehow missed a turn, but my car was gone. Panic set in. I tried running, but the road stretched endlessly, looping back on itself no matter which direction I went. Then I noticed the cornfield wasn't the same anymore. The stalks were taller, their leaves darker, almost black. And the rustling, it was louder now, closer, as if the field itself was alive. That's when I saw it again. The figure. This time, it was standing in the middle of the road, its features obscured by shadow. But I could make out its face, pale and expressionless, with hollow black eyes that seemed to pierce through me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Who are you?" I whispered. It didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, bony and impossibly long, and pointed toward the cornfield. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the figure didn't move, didn't chase me. It just stood there, pointing. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought the only way out was through. Maybe I was too scared to defy whatever the thing was. But I stepped off the road and into the field. The corn swallowed me immediately, the stalks closing in on all sides. The air was thicker here, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. I tried to follow a straight line, but the field seemed to twist and shift around me. The whispers started soon after, soft at first, like the murmur of voices just out of earshot. Then they grew louder, more insistent. "Turn back. Don't belong. Too late." My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. That's when I felt the first touch. It was cold and clammy, brushing against my arm. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Then came another touch, this time on my back, and another on my neck. They weren't hands. They felt like stalks, but they moved, wrapping around my limbs, pulling me deeper into the field. I screamed, thrashing against the unseen force, but the more I struggled, the tighter the grip became. I don't know how long I fought. Time didn't seem to exist in that place. But eventually, the pulling stopped, and I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. When I opened my eyes, I was in another clearing. This one was different, dead silent. The corn around it withered and blackened. In the center was a massive spiral carved into the earth, its edges lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. And standing at the center of the spiral was the figure. It turned to face me, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. Then it spoke, its voice a guttural, otherworldly growl. The field takes what it's owed. I don't remember much after that. Just pain-searing, unbearable pain as the earth opened beneath me, and the corn swallowed me whole. I woke up on the side of a highway, my car parked neatly on the shoulder. The sun was rising, and the cornfield was gone, replaced by empty farmland. But something was different. My phone was back in my pocket, but the date was wrong. According to the screen, 3 days had passed. I tried telling myself it was just a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But every time I close my eyes, I see the spiral. And sometimes when I'm driving at night, I find myself back on that dirt road. No matter which way I turn, it always leads to the field. And I know one day I won't make it out.